Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today it is 21st of June, and today we'll be doing a short update about the front lines. And so before I begin, if you've noticed, we basically added in many new polygons to the map now. And so now all of Donetsk is either colored in blue or in orange. So I'm almost done with that. So you can see the map is going to look much more cohesive. All these different shapes are going to be combined together, and it's all just going to be one color. There's not going to be any overlap. And so I'm really looking forward to finishing this. I've been working all day on it today, and tomorrow I'm probably going to finish it off. And I also plan to add in a Ukrainian blue color for Zaporozhye and also for the Kharkiv Oblast, just to, make the map more conducive to general audience, just to make it more interactive. Let's begin with the actual situation on the ground. Starting off again with Piatykhatky, which is really a focal point of Ukraine's offensive at the moment. And I do believe it is for good reason. I definitely understand why Ukraine is trying to push for it so hard, and I also understand why the Russians are trying to hold on to it so hard, which is why we've been seeing so much back and forth from both sides. It's probably the fifth time now that either side has claimed to have retaken it. And so Piatykhatky, if you don't know, it's on the T0812 road. And so that's the road that is basically over here and then connects to Zherebyanki. So from there, this road, it links up to this important highway which connects Vasilivka to the town of Kupyansk. And so this is a very important highway which is adjacent to the Dnieper River, and it's one of the main highways leading up to Zaporozhye. It's also one of the main highways that the Russians are using to basically connect together all of their different nodes of defense and coordinate their defensive faculties and basically set up these fortifications against the Ukrainians, send in reinforcements and resupply. And so from a supply lines point of view, the Russians do want to hold on to this area over here, this road. They also want to control the roads that are connecting to it, which is why they're trying to hold on to Luhove, for instance, and Zherebyanki, which is basically an area where they regrouped, the Russian forces regrouped in the town of Zherebyanki after they were pushed out of Piatykhatky, specifically the 19th Motor Rifle Division, and they have been holding it firm over there despite the fact that when Ukraine was initially able to secure control over Piatykhatky, they tried to continue their advance even further into the Russian lines by attacking Zherebyanki, but they were not successful. Also, of course, the Ukrainians are eyeing Hrozhove, because by taking Hrozhove, they will be able to penetrate Russia's line of contact and reach the first Russian line of defense, which is, 10 kilometers away from the actual line of contact. But because the Russians don't have that many fortifications in between the line of contact and the first defensive line around Vasilivka, they were potentially looking for a breakthrough at Piatykhatky, which the Russians may not have anticipated, and then from there to hop from town to town using the armored columns, dropping off a platoon or two in each town, and then eventually reaching the first defensive line. And this defensive line over here that we have in yellow is actually on lower elevation, so if the Ukrainians are able to secure the fields to the north of it, they would be able to shell it pretty consistently and attack the town of Vasilivka, which is again it's a key Russian city in this area in the northern Zaporozhye Oblast that the Russians are utilizing in order to coordinate their defense of the line of contact in this area. And it would also sort of force the Russians to retreat out of their forward positions in Kupyansk, because they would have positions to the east, the Ukrainians, and so there would sort of be a bulge, and you'd have to have all these Russians retreat further south across this black line and across this blue circle that I have over here. And so that's essentially the Ukrainian plan. It's not gone entirely to plan, but that's sort of to be expected, especially when the Russians are conducting these fierce counterattacks each time that the Ukrainians attack. And so now the Russian and Ukrainian sources are claiming that the Russians attempted a counterattack around the forest belt to the west of the town of Piatykhatky, whatever remains of it after the fierce fighting. And so that seems like a good area for Russian infantry to dismount because, they have their vehicles in Zherebyanki, and then from there they go to the forest, and then it's a good position to flank the town of Piatykhatky, to attack the warehouses, and basically start the battle. And that's also a rendezvous point for the Russian forces when they were pushed out of Piatykhatky in the first place. And so this forest belt, although it looks small, it does hold a significance in the local battle between both sides. But yesterday, there was a Russian attempted counterattack, and so the one we're hearing of today might be a different one. But I do recall that the one yesterday, it included an armored column, not a large one, just some tanks and BMPs from Zherebyanki. And there's actually a video here showing that the Ukrainian 128th Dnipro Territorial Defense Brigade was able to actually destroy at least one Russian tank during Russia's attempt to counterattack with their armored column. They destroyed a tank, and this was done by the 128th Brigade's infantry. They were using Stugna P ATGMs, and once the tank was destroyed, the BMP that was accompanying it, this Russian BMP, it was forced to retreat back to the town of Zherebyanki. So that was yesterday, but now there are new reports coming out for the past few hours, and especially as I saw from Rybar, which is a pro-Russian source that is very detailed, and I have in the past used the reports, and I've referenced them previously because I do find them to be one of the more reliable Russian sources. They are pretty open when Russia loses land, and so I use it for that, but now I'm also going to reference them here because they claim that Piatykhatky is under Russian control, and so they have it colored in red or everything. But I'm still wary of that. I'm very skeptical because, again, the situation has been going back and forth for so long over here. I don't think that there's any singular unit that's holding full control over this specific area. I think that it changes throughout the day. But that in and of itself, the fact that the Ukrainians are holed up over here and can't further advance, I think that in and of itself is a bigger deal, and it should be what we're discussing. It shouldn't really be the intricate nitty-gritty details of who controls each square foot of Piatykhatky and the adjacent fields. And so again, the Ukrainians, if their plan really is to, go from Piatykhatky, reach this line of defense, which is something that I would personally do if I was in charge of the Ukrainian forces in this area, then they need to at the very least, first get control of Piatykhatky. And if they can't even do that, then they can't even think about going further south. But I'm sure that is certainly a part of their plans, and they have certainly not given up yet. They're going to have many more attempts at taking over this town. And, the Russians, I think they were open about the fact that they may have to give up some of the land that they have around the line of contact. It's basically a security zone, this 10-kilometer piece of land in between the Russian first line of defense and the line of contact. And the Russians want to hold onto the security zone for as long as possible because, it gives them more time to beef up their own defenses, like the black lines over here that I have mapped out. If you can see them, like this one over here and this one over here. So it's good to buy some time, but of course the Ukrainians, they are certainly serious about this attack, and they have many more brigades that I've recently added to the map that have still not engaged in serious combat, and so they're certainly going to be moved in now. There's still a lot of Western equipment that has not been utilized, and so Russia will at some point have to give up at least some land, and they have already given up 8 towns, and that already shows a willingness to retreat whenever it's absolutely necessary. And that's a part of Russia's military doctrine in the area. But something interesting is that there's also leaked audio today from Prigozhin, I remember head of the Wagner Group. In the leaked audio, he was claiming that the Ukrainians had control over Piatykhatky and that they controlled the northern part of Robotyne. Robotyne is over here. What is interesting is that in my last video, I talked about how the Russians were pushing to the north of Robotyne in reverse to the gains made by the Ukrainians. And so what Prigozhin is saying goes totally against what I was reporting in my last video. So that's pretty interesting. He says that they control the northern part of this town, which probably would include the cemetery and, the tree lines to the north. He also said that the Russians were. He basically was saying that the Russians were not on guard and they weren't. They're too delusional in that one day they might wake up and discover that Crimea is under Ukrainian control. So he's basically condemning them for not recognizing the real threat that Ukraine poses with this counteroffensive. That's basically his narrative with the leaked audio. But again, it's important to note that Prigozhin, he has a long history of saying, making these statements that could be perceived by really either the Russian Ministry of Defense or by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense in a certain way, trying to like elicit a certain reaction for his own interests. And so anything he says in terms of like a fact-based analysis, you can't really trust him with specific details because he's always going to shift them. He's always going to mold them to fit his own narrative. Everybody does that to a certain extent, but maybe he's right about the more general truth that Ukraine does pose a threat. But the thing about Robotyne being under Ukrainian control, the northern parts, that is something that there's no evidence of, there's no footage of. I don't even think the Ukrainian sources confirmed that. And so it's very similar to what he was saying during the entire Bakhmut saga, where he was saying that, the Ukrainians were about to attack from the flanks and create this encirclement. Now they are attacking from the flanks, by the way, from the south and the north, but there's not really an imminent danger to the Russian garrison in Bakhmut. By the way, he's not on the ground in Zaporozhye, so he's not really fully understanding what's going on over here. And even if he is, then, he always has his own interests in mind. So just remember that whenever he says stuff like this. Now, let's go up to the situation in Kreminna. So I do definitely have to update the map over here because it looks very ugly. Yeah, I need to make sure that, first of all, there's a border for the blue line, which is the Ukrainian line, and then for the LPR line. And then I need to include a bit of a gray zone because there's a lot of open areas in this sector around Kreminna to Liman that neither side fully controls. So you have to take that into account. But anyway, the Russian sources, they have been claiming that the 76th Air Assault Division, which is a Russian unit, by the way, which originally was stationed in Kreminna direction, but apparently moved to the Bakhmut sector a few months ago, and that was around when Wagner was requesting reinforcements for the flanks around Bakhmut. Apparently, they still have some presence around Kreminna, and so that unit, according to the Russian sources, is engaged in offensive activities around the forested area to the south of Kreminna and also to the west of it, like around Dibrova, in the direction of the city or town of Torske, which is a Ukrainian defensive hub, and it's along the Ukrainian line, which is aimed at holding out at this river over here. What's this river called? I totally forgot. Zherebets River. This was a very important river earlier on in the year. But still, the Ukrainians do have a lot of formations around this river, and it's a natural defensive barrier if the Ukrainians are forced to withdraw from their forward positions. And so it seems like Russia's trying to push in that direction. Of course, not in any sort of rapid pace, but it's something that they've been trying to build off of over the past week or so. And there's actually reporting from the IDAR battalion, which apparently is also fighting in this direction. I wasn't even aware of that. But the IDAR battalion, they are reporting that there's extremely heavy shelling of the town of Torske and of neighboring towns by the Russians in recent days, especially with the TOS-1A flamethrower. So we saw that engaged in Piatykhatky and now again in the Kreminna direction. And this is pretty much indicative of a Russian push. There's at least some reports that I saw that they were able to make some minor gains in the forested areas. But again, that is all, I believe, at the moment, positional fighting. But it could lead to something larger, especially with what Russia's planning in the Kupiansk direction. So in the Kupiansk direction, which I find to be the most interesting part of today's events, the Russians were able to advance very, very close to Kupyansk, to the northern outskirts of Kupyansk. They took over really what remains of the forested area adjacent to the Oskil River. And really what separates the Russian line, their forward line, from the outskirts of Kupyansk is really about 2 miles, which is equivalent to about 3 kilometers. And so this is significant because, first of all, the Ukrainians do have positions in Sinkivka, and Sinkivka has not been taken by the Russians yet. So it does appear as if Sinkivka is being enveloped in a certain way, which is either means that the Russians are going to try to attack it directly or that they're trying to force the Ukrainians out, because the Ukrainians do have fortified positions within Sinkivka, specifically the 103rd Territorial Defense Brigade. And then there's also the town of Petropavlivka, which there's a road from Vilshana, which is a town that Russia does control, and through that road they can advance to the south and attack Petropavlivka from the north. It would also help to take control of Sinkivka first, but Petropavlivka is important because it's a town that it is directly to the east of Kupyansk, and so then from Petropavlivka, the road system that is originating in Kupiansk sort of splits off into the rest of the front line. And so it would also give the Russians an amazing position to flank Kupiansk from multiple different directions, because they already have the flank from the north, which they're probably going to push through and try to take over this armory, which was originally under Russian control and had a lot of ammo and stockpiles over there. They might still be present in that area, so the Russians might be looking to push in that direction. They also want to push in the direction of Petropavlivka and attack from the east. And actually, let's look at the topographic map to see what's going on there. So here's the topographic map. I'll map up the front line for you guys. So here we have Kupiansk. We have here Liman Perishi, Vilshana, Sinkivka, Petropavlivka. As I said before, the front line looks something like this. The red is like where the Russians and the Ukrainians sort of like divide. It's the line of contact. It looks something like this. So you could see how the Ukrainians and the Russians, just because they're fighting along the Oskil River, it's all very low elevation, obviously, like 200 feet above sea level, very little, honestly. But in this general area, of course, because it's around a river, it's going to be very low elevation, and it's also around highway systems and roads, so usually in those areas, it's also pretty low elevation. So they're on about level ground when you look at it from the northern flank. But something that I do find interesting is that there is a bit of a ridge further to the east, and it is under Ukrainian control at the moment. But it is very close to the line of contact, and there's no towns in this area, this ridge, this high ground. There's hills over here that are 500, 600 feet above sea level. And that is very good if you were able to take over those positions and overlook towns, just Kupiansk, which are on the river, and just continuously fire mortars in that direction, smaller fire. You could also have domination over Petropavlivka, of course, and the road system. And so I do think that the Russians should definitely try to push towards this ridge. They already have positions in Vilshana, so it would not be difficult to just go to the south directly, also from the east. And because there's no towns in this area, there's not really a Ukrainian formation that's constantly present in this area. And so I don't think it will be that difficult for the Russians to take it over. So if they're serious about actually retaking Kupiansk, or at least the eastern part, then they should definitely try to take over this ridge and then, fire onto the Ukrainian positions, which are, and there are way more Ukrainians present along the river than there are on this random field ridge. So yeah, that's all for today. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.